Well, right about then, I looked over to my right, and there was a wall, and this wall was so long. It had to have been miles long, and it was full of scrolls. And everybody that had a lifetime on Earth had a scroll on that wall, just like where mine was. And when you finish a lifetime, you come back, you take the scroll out, and you look at what you wrote to see if you accomplished what it is you set out to accomplish. Well, the next
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I am very excited and feel so honored that John J. Davis is here with me to share his journey home. And what an amazing story. So what an amazing experience. So hello, John. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for having me on. It's such a privilege. So thank you for having me be able to share my story on your channel and with your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, your experience is so amazing and heartwarming because it helps us remember that there's so much more, right, than our
Oh,
physical life
absolutely.
on Earth. Yeah. So
And
if you don't
it's
mind
funny.
sharing, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's strange for me because I have lived with this experience for so many years now because it happened when I was 21. It's almost it's almost second nature for me. And I forget what my story sounds like for people who hear it for the first time. It really is pretty extraordinary. And I am just so lucky that I have the chance to know what happens when we pass from this lifetime and be able to share it with people who are truly interested. And it's been the biggest blessing of my life. I love to share it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for having the courage to share because it's not easy. And in this day and age, it's a little bit easier than
Yeah,
it used to be, and I understand that as well. But your your experience helps people too with understanding that we don't die, and that was part of your mission, if I remember
absolutely.
correctly. Yeah.
Yep, you're right. Absolutely.
Hmm. So if you could just start and tell us the story.
Sure, sure. And as I'm going along, Sharon, feel free to interrupt me and ask me questions. It's always more fun because every time I go on a show, I always have the ideal that I'm going to share everything, but I always seem to forget things as I go. But if the host asks me questions, then I tend to remember everything. So feel free to interrupt me too.
Thank
And
you.
I'll tell you how this all started was my dad was in sales and he won a sales contest. And part of what he won was he won these two mopeds, or what we call scooters now. And we used to drive these things all over the neighborhood, especially on the weekends. Well, one weekend I was out driving around and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand and I needed to go into surgery to have them reattached. Well, as a 21-year-old, I don't think I had ever spent really any time inside of a hospital. I'd never had surgery before. I didn't know what to expect. So the day the surgery comes, and we go in the operating room, and when they give me the anesthesia, I had a severe allergic reaction, and it stopped my heart for 7 minutes. And this whole experience that I had was done in a 7 minute period of time on Earth time. But when I was actually having the experience, it felt like I was on the other side for an hour or two. It just seemed like it went on forever.
Mhm.
And I want to tell your audience, kind of give them a little bit of backstory, which makes so they can kind of understand where my story begins. A lot of times when we hear about a normal near death experience, we hear the person has an accident or they're in surgery and they die and they find themselves floating above their bodies looking down at the scene. Then they become aware of this tunnel and they start to move down the tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, there's a white light. And as they're moving down the tunnel, they're met by someone, a loved one, a parent, a grandparent, a friend, someone that they know who tells them it's not your time. You have to go back. So we never knew what happened at the other end of that white light. Well, what they did with me, and I still don't know how they did this, but they somehow bypassed the tunnel on my experience. So where my story starts is on the other side of the white light. And that's how it begins. And I'll get to that in just a second. Also, I want to tell people too that everything that I was shown, I'm able to tell people that we all have spirit guides who help us plan our lifetimes. And spirit guides are with us throughout our whole life. Well, during my experience early on, I heard in my left ear, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And he took me to all these different places that I saw on the other side. And people have always asked me, "Did you get some kind of a gift? Did something happen for you after you came back?" And I've got to tell people that, not really. But I think the only thing that happened was that I have 100% recall of every single thing that I saw, everything people told me, all the whole experience. I remember it like it was yesterday. And that's profound for me because normally I have a really bad memory. I can't even tell you what I had for dinner last night. So the fact that I can remember everything that happened, I think was something God gave me to be able to share it. Because what they showed me wasn't for me. It was for me to share it with anybody who would listen. Because it's such a profound story, and I think it can make such a difference in people's lives.
Mhm.
So here's how it starts. They give me the anesthesia, my heart stops. In the very next second, my eyes opened, and I was standing in the most beautiful building I have ever seen. It was this long, long corridor building, and it was made of white marble, white polished marble. It was so long that I couldn't see the end of this building. And my first thought, Sharon, was, oh my gosh, I had no idea the hospital was this big because I didn't know what had happened. This whole journey that my guide took me on, I didn't know that I had died. It was only after the fact that I realized what had actually happened. So I'm looking at this beautiful white marble building. To my right, again, as far down as I could see, were these beautiful white marble columns, just like you'd see in Greece or Rome. Beautiful white polished marble, maybe 20 or 30 feet high, and they were about 6 feet apart all the way down as far as you could see. In the center where I was standing were these tables, just like a regular kitchen table, but they were marble, and they had stools or seats on all four sides of these tables. Again, they went down as far as you could see, about 6 feet apart. And every table had two people there, and they were what my guide called orientation counselors.
Mhm.
And right about this time, this is when I heard in my left ear, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And as this whole thing unfolded, he was talking to me in my ear, telling me what I was seeing. The building that I was in is called the Orientation Center. And every one of these tables had two people, and they're what are called orientation counselors. And what their job is to help people who have just crossed over from a life and now they're back home again on the other side. Well, here was the most profound part of this whole experience in the orientation center. To my immediate left were all I can describe them as were tunnels. They looked like doorways that had been cut out of solid marble. And
Mhm.
again, they went all the way down as far as you could see, about 6 feet apart. And every tunnel correlated to a table so that when somebody came through these tunnels, the first thing that they saw were these counselors. And that's what happens when somebody crosses into the light once they're in the tunnel. When you go into the light, you end up in the orientation center. So my guide said, look at the next tunnel. So I looked up and there was a man coming through. He was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he had his right arm holding his left chest like he had pain. And my guide said he died of a heart attack. So, what happens is once a person finishes their life, their soul gets out of their body, they start going down the tunnel, and then they go into the orientation center. Well, the woman that was closest to him, one of the orientation counselors, she stood up, she walked over to him, she took her hands in hers, and she led him back to the table. And just kind of as a side note here, my guide said that on the other side, everybody has things that they do, kind of like what we call jobs, but they
Mhm.
aren't jobs where you go to pay bills or expenses. You
Mhm.
just do things that you love to do. And the people that were in this orientation center, they loved being orientation counselors. And their whole job is to help people remember where they're from. Because when we come into a lifetime, almost every one of us forgets where we're from. There are a few people I have met in my life who've had some memories about what it's like on the other side before they come in. But for the
Mhm.
most part, most of us don't remember our true home. So the orientation counselors, they help people remember where they're from. And they basically tell them that you just finished your life on earth, you're back home on the other side now. And their whole job is to basically just orientate them back home again. And my guide said to watch him. So as I watched him, the most amazing thing started happening. He began to change. He changed from a man who was elderly into a man who was in his 30s. And my guide said everybody is in their 30s. But he didn't tell me
Thank
why.
goodness.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because Jesus died at 33. I really haven't, he didn't tell me why, but everybody is young on the other side. Well, when she was done talking to him, he stood up and he walked off to the right and he walked down 3 steps into what I call the gardens. I don't know if the other side calls them that, but that's just what I call them because they were the most beautiful gardens I had ever seen. The grass was an emerald green color,
Mhm.
and there were flowers and plants and trees, and it looked like an English garden that was absolutely perfectly manicured. And there were all these people there. Well, my guide said everybody has a reunion. And it's a really big deal, I found out, that when a person has a lifetime on earth and they finish that life and they go through all the turmoil, all the trials, all the hardships that we have here on earth, it's a really big deal when you do that because there are, my guide said, there are many, many souls who don't want to come to this planet because it is so hard.
Mhm.
All these
Mhm.
people that were here in the gardens waiting for him were people that he knew in his lifetime. Parents, grandparents, family, friends were all there to greet him, plus all the people that he already knew on the other side. And they were all applauding, clapping, hugging him. It was this huge big reunion. And that's when I realized it really is a big deal when you come here. Because life on earth, it's not easy for anybody.
No.
All of us, all of us have our Mount Everest moments.
Mhm.
And sometimes just daily living to make it through can be really hard. And that's why it's such a big deal to have a lifetime here.
Yeah. I always hear from, because I work with spirit, I always hear that only the brave come here.
Yes,
The brave souls come to Earth.
absolutely. Because
Yeah.
it is the hardest of all the planets.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
definitely. It's a challenge here. I want to share something real quick while you take a breath, if you're okay with that.
yeah, absolutely.
About the gardens. Robert Monroe. Do you know about Robert Monroe from the
Yes,
Monroe
I've heard
Institute?
of him. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm an out-of-body traveler, so I've studied all that stuff. But he talks about the gardens in his travels, that he was at the gardens. He
Oh,
describes them as the space where souls go when they first. He calls it the park, though, where souls
oh,
go, where they just transition, type of thing. And when my mother passed, and I didn't know about the gardens at that time or the park. When my mother passed, she was in the hospital. My sister and I had gone home to rest for a while before we went back, but she was dying, and I had an out of body experience that night. And she was sitting out, and I end up in a park, like the gardens, beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful. And I see my grandparents standing off, who had already passed, in the background, and my mother is sitting on a park bench, and she has her head down, and they had given her morphine to help her with her breathing at that point. And she's sitting there and she's really confused. And I go over and I sit next to her and I say, Mom, are you okay? And she says, Oh, and she calls me by my nickname, Sherry. She says, I'm really confused. And I'm sitting there with her and I have my arm around her, comforting her. And she hadn't died yet on the earth plane.
Yeah.
My stepfather pulls up in a limousine and he gets out. I see a limousine pull up and he gets out, and he had passed a few years earlier, and he has a dozen of red roses. He gets out and he's all spiffy dressed, and he walks over to her and hands her this dozen red roses, and she gets up, she recognizes him and gets in the limo with him, and they take off. And then I
Wow.
get a phone call after that she had passed.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What an amazing experience.
Yes,
That's
and
really neat.
it was in the park and in the gardens. Yeah.
Wow. I've heard of him, but I don't think I've read any of his books or anything yet.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, they're amazing. Definitely. So please
That's
continue. I
fantastic.
just felt, I don't know why, I just wanted to share that to,
Oh,
confirm. And I'm sure you've had lots of confirmations, but about the gardens in the
oh
park
yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful story. That's how perfect that would be to be picked up in a limousine and have flowers given to you. That's what a great imagery.
from your husband
So
who
that
had
yeah, that was
passed. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, those are the gardens, and I think what happens is I don't know if the next steps that he took me to are something that are sequential, but it seemed like this is kind of the process of what happens when people cross over. They go through the tunnel, they go through the light, they go to the orientation center, then they have the reunion. Well, the next place my guide took me to, and I want to tell you that everything that he took me to the outside first. The place that I was only a small part of the other side, and it seemed to be made of buildings that had the beautiful Greek marble type of architecture. And it was almost the feeling of being on a college campus. You know how a college campus has you've got your history building, then you've got your English building, and everything is in one general area. That's kind of what it felt like where I was. But all the buildings he took me to, we have nothing like them here on Earth. They were so large, just absolutely extraordinarily gigantic. So the first building he takes me to, he shows me the outside first. It had all these marble columns all around the outside of it. It was kind of a rectangular building. And he takes me in, and there's all kinds of rooms there. And the room that I was in was it looked like a round theater. That if we were to see it today, we'd think this is a round theater. Well, instead of having one movie screen up front, it had all these screens up along the ceiling, like movie screens. And there must have been 15 or 20 of these. And all of a sudden, they turned on, and every different movie screen was playing a different episode of my life. One of the screens showed me as a little baby in my crib. Another one showed me as a toddler. Another one showed me as my first day of kindergarten. And each screen had a different episode of my life up to the age that I was at the time, which was 21. And my guide said, everybody goes through a life review. And the whole purpose of the life review is to see if you accomplished what you just set out to accomplish in that lifetime. And the thing that I like to tell people is there was no sense of any kind of judgment whatsoever. I was raised very Catholic. We used to go to church 3 times a week and then also on Sundays. So I was always at church, and I'd always believed that there was some kind of judgment, that somebody would judge your life. But the only people that look at your lifetime are you and your guide, because your guide is the one that helps you plan your lifetime. So when you finish it, your guide is also the one to help you see if did you accomplish what you set out to accomplish. And the best way that I like to explain it to people is like when people do New Year's resolutions. A lot of times you think, okay, it's the end of the year. I want to have all of these goals for the next year. That's kind of what goes into planning for a lifetime. And we'll talk about that too. Well, the interesting thing about the life review is you actually feel what the good things that you did in your life, the people that you helped. You feel what other people feel. Well, the other thing too that I learned is you also realize if you hurt people, you feel what other people felt. And the one thing my guide said that nobody gets out of the life review. Everybody has to go through it. And it's one of the best learning that a soul can go through. Because if they even if they unintentionally hurt somebody, they still feel what that other person felt like. And if somebody intentionally hurts somebody, then they also feel what their victims felt. So that is one of the best ways that souls learn that you can't hurt people and they actually feel what other people feel like. So I
Yeah,
thought that was pretty extraordinary too.
that is. And what about animals? If it is it all, would that also apply to animals? I would imagine it would apply to anything sentient or anything that has feelings or
You know,
in the
I
life
don't
review.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I know about animals is that our animals that we had growing up, the animals that we loved, they also they make the transition to the other side.
Hmm.
God is so good and so loving that he created these little companions for us that we have with us forever. And when we pass, they're going to be in the reunion area just like all the people that you knew. So all your animals are there too.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the next place he took me to was again another gigantic building, again columns all around the outside of it. And he took me to the inside. And this one was what we would call today, it looked like a regular movie theater, a long room with a movie screen at the front. And this part really was kind of hard for me to understand because being raised Catholic, I had never heard the term past lifetimes. I had no idea, but past lifetimes really are real. We live for eternity and we can
Hmm.
have as many lifetimes as we want. So my guide said, I'm going to show you 3 different past lifetimes. So the screen turns on, and the first life that I'm shown is me as a monk. And I had a shaved head, and I was wearing a red gown, and I was in a monastery. And my job in that lifetime was to teach kids about becoming monks in that life. And I knew just by looking at that lifetime that it had taken place somewhere in Southeast Asia. Then the screen went off. Then another lifetime showed up, and it was me. And I didn't look anything like I do now. None of us do, because our lives are always based on genetics, DNA. And so this next screen shows up, and I'm a shoe peddler. And I had a wheelbarrow, and I had all of these shoes stacked in this wheelbarrow. And my job in that life was to fix people's shoes. And what I was doing was I was taking them back to the village to pass them out to the people. And that lifetime took place somewhere in Eastern Europe. Well, the third life he showed me, I was a fisherman, and I was standing in a little wooden boat on this lake, and I had nets that I would throw into the water and try to catch fish. And my job in that life was to help feed the community. And that lifetime took place somewhere in the Middle East. And so I saw these three lifetimes, and I realized that, wow, oh my gosh, this is not the only life you have. So if people think that they never got to accomplish what they wanted to in this lifetime, it's okay, because you
Yeah.
can have as many lifetimes as you want. And people, that what I thought was so interesting is that nobody forces you to come into a lifetime. It's totally up to the individual soul.
I
Some
see.
people don't want to have that many lives, and some people do. It just depends what they want to learn. And what I also realized too is that you don't have to come into an earth lifetime just to learn. You can still learn on the other side. In fact, anything that you love to do here on earth, you can do on the other side. If you like to paint, you can do that. If you like to read, or you like to write, or you just want to go hiking, or just visit with friends, all those things you can do on the other side. And as much as I try to explain how fantastic it is over there, I really can never get close to what it's really like. The best way that I can describe it is, if you ever had a fantastic Christmas with family and friends around you, and that feeling that you have of this, that absolute love and joy of being with loved ones, that's what it feels like on the other side all the time.
Hmm.
And you don't have
Yeah.
to come into a life. It's strictly up to you how much you want to learn and how much you want to develop, because you can still grow on the other side, but you can also learn experientially by coming into a lifetime. And that's really the reason why we come into a life, is because on the other side, there is no hardships of any kind. There's no war, there's no disease, there's no violence, there's no homelessness, there's no hunger. All of that stuff only exists when you come into a lifetime. So on the other side, you can still learn, but you don't learn by overcoming something, because there's nothing to overcome. That only happens in life. And that's one of the main reasons why we actually come into a lifetime. And it's kind of like trying to describe to somebody what it's like to ride a bike. You really can't experience it until you actually do it.
Hmm.
And that's why we come in.
Yeah.
So I
Kind
thought
of like
that
the hero's journey down here.
Joseph Campbell, yes, exactly,
Totally.
exactly.
What's better than that, right?
Yeah,
You know, while we're here, we're thinking, oh, what was I thinking? Why am I here? Oh, this is awful and terrible. But when we accomplish it, it's the best feeling ever. And I
and
can
you know what
imagine the
about
celebration. Hmm.
you know what makes that so fantastic too is that the hard things that you survive, you take that with you. Everything that you go through, everything that you have, the experience that's difficult, you take that learning with you, and it
Yeah.
becomes part of who you are, and you become more by having gone through all of that. And I think that's such an important thing, because I really believe that when God created all of us, He created all of us with this desire to want to learn. We always like to learn more and to grow. Everybody likes to learn new things.
Hmm.
And that's what lifetimes give for us. We have the opportunity to learn new things. So the past lifetime, I thought that was so neat.
I love
And
that. Yeah. If
yeah,
I can interrupt you just for a second,
yeah,
John, I always, I always say, if God only gave us this one lifetime to learn all there is to learn and experience all there is to experience, and then we got gypped.
exactly. Yep,
And I was raised
absolutely.
Catholic too, so yeah, it's something that is not taught in the Catholic religion for sure. Yeah.
Yep, very true. Very true. And it was so nice to know that, wow, a lot of the things that I was taught to believe really aren't true,
Hmm.
especially the whole judgment idea. That's not true.
Yeah,
Well,
especially.
I'll keep going.
Yes,
The
please.
next building, the next one he took me to, this next building was different than all the others that I saw, because this one was round. Beautiful round building, absolutely enormous. And it had columns. all in a circle. And there was a big, huge dome on top of this building. And my guide told me that this is where we go when we want to plan a lifetime. And I don't know why we go to this building. It just seems like that's where we go when you go with your guide and you plan a life. So he takes me to the inside and he takes me up to a table, a rectangular table, again, the beautiful motif of white marble. And there was a scroll on it. And the scroll was round up with a blue ribbon around it. And what it looked like, have you ever seen like a Egyptian papyrus?
Hmm. Sure.
It looked kind of like that. And so I took the ribbon off and I unscrolled the scroll on the table. And I could see that there was black handwriting on it. And it looked like, do you remember as a kid going through having a calligraphy class?
Hmm.
And you'd have that ink or that pen, you dip it in the inkwell and you write. It looked kind of like that. And what my guide was showing me was that before we come into a lifetime, we actually write out and plan what we want to accomplish and what our lifetimes are going to be like. And you write down things like, what country are you going to live in? What language are you going to learn? Are you going to go to a university? What kind of career are you going to have? Are you going to have kids? All these things go into a lifetime. Well, when I went to try to read it, the scroll folded up again and I wasn't able to see it. And the reason was because if I had known what I was supposed to go through in this lifetime, I may not have gone through it. I may have somehow interrupted what I was supposed to learn. My
Yeah.
guy just wanted to show me that you do in fact plan your lifetime. Well, right about then I looked over to my right and this there was a wall, and this wall was so long. It had to have been miles long, and it was full of scrolls. And everybody that had a lifetime on Earth had a scroll on that wall, just like where mine was. And when you finish a lifetime, you come back, you take the scroll out, and you look at what you wrote to see if you accomplished what it is you set out to accomplish. Well, the next thing I did is I looked over to my left, and there was this huge, sprawling window. And it was the first time that I saw other people. And there was a walkway outside this building, and there were all kinds of people walking back and forth. So wherever my guide took me, it was a place of a lot of activity. And people have asked me, well, what do we look like? And they look just like we do. They have bodies just like us, but the bodies are better. The bodies here on Earth, we get sick, we age, the bodies break down, we get broken bones, all these different things happen. But that's not the case with the bodies on the other side. Even the Bible says in Genesis, we are made in the image and likeness of God, but these bodies aren't perfect. The bodies on the other side are perfect. And people have different hair color. Some people are blonde, some people are brunette, some people have long hair, some people have short hair, some people are taller, some are shorter, and it looked just like we do. Well, one of the neatest things about this was that on the other side of this walkway, there was, and this is when I learned about nature on the other side, that everything that's beautiful here on Earth is also on the other side. Oceans, rivers, lakes, mountains, all those things are there too. Well, on the other side of this walkway, there was this, and I've never even seen anything on Earth that has ever come close to how beautiful this. It was a lake. It was a round lake, and it was so still, it looked like glass. Nothing was moving on the surface. And the water was so clear that I could see the bottom of this lake. The neatest part about it is all around the circle, there were these weeping willow trees. And the weeping willow trees are the ones that have their leaves, the branches that hang over. And all the leaves were floating on the surface of this lake. It was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful.